What if one of the most misunderstood mental health conditions is not actually just about mood swings, but about disrupted brain energy, dopamine regulation, sleep biology, and nervous system stability? Millions of people live with bipolar disorder, yet most conversations around it remain incredibly oversimplified. People often imagine bipolar disorder as simply alternating between feeling extremely happy and extremely sad. But that is not what's really happening inside the brain. Here's what's really going on inside your body. Bipolar disorder is deeply connected to how the brain regulates energy, emotional intensity, motivation, sleep, stress chemistry, and circadian rhythm. During manic or hypomanic states, certain brain systems become excessively activated. Energy rises dramatically, sleep need decreases, thoughts accelerate, impulsivity increases, emotional intensity becomes amplified. But during depressive phases, the opposite often happens. Motivation drops, energy crashes, cognitive function slows. The nervous system shifts toward exhaustion and emotional shutdown. In simple terms, the brain struggles to maintain stable regulation between activation and recovery. And this matters far beyond mood alone. Bipolar disorder can affect sleep quality, focus, relationships, decision-making, stress resilience, metabolic health, and long-term nervous system function. Now, importantly, bipolar disorder is a legitimate biological condition. It is not weakness. It is not laziness. And it is not simply a personality trait. Modern neuroscience shows bipolar disorder involves real changes in dopamine signaling, circadian rhythm regulation, emotional processing networks, and stress physiology. One of the most important discoveries researchers continue making is this: sleep disruption and circadian instability are often deeply connected to bipolar symptoms. This is why people with bipolar disorder are frequently highly sensitive to sleep deprivation, stress, substance use, irregular schedules, and overstimulation. The nervous system becomes more reactive to instability. Let me explain this with a simple analogy. Imagine an orchestra trying to perform while the timing between instruments constantly shifts. Even if each musician plays well individually, the entire system loses coordination. That's what bipolar disorder can do to brain regulation. The systems controlling emotion, energy, sleep, and motivation lose synchronization. Now, the encouraging part is this: the brain is adaptable. And while bipolar disorder often requires professional treatment and sometimes medication, research increasingly shows that physiology and lifestyle also matter enormously. Sleep stability, light exposure, stress management, exercise, nutrition, social rhythm, and nervous system recovery can all influence long-term outcomes significantly. In today's video, we're going to break down the neuroscience and physiology of bipolar disorder in a clear, practical, and evidence-based way. We'll discuss how dopamine affects mania and motivation, why sleep loss can trigger mood instability, how stress hormones dysregulate the nervous system, how metabolism and inflammation influence brain health, and practical science-based tools that support emotional stability and long-term resilience. Because once you understand the biology behind bipolar disorder, you stop viewing it through stigma and begin understanding it through neuroscience and physiology. To truly understand bipolar disorder, you first have to understand dopamine. Because dopamine is one of the most important neurochemicals involved in motivation, reward, energy, drive, and goal-directed behavior. Most people think dopamine is simply the pleasure chemical. But biologically, dopamine is more about pursuit than pleasure. It tells the brain, this matters. Move toward it. And in bipolar disorder, dopamine regulation can become highly unstable. Here's what's really going on inside the brain. During manic or hypomanic states, dopamine activity often becomes excessively elevated in key brain circuits involved in reward, motivation, and emotional intensity. As dopamine rises, energy increases, sleep need decreases, thought speed accelerates, confidence rises dramatically, and impulsive behavior becomes more likely. This is why mania can sometimes feel intensely productive or euphoric initially. The brain becomes overstimulated, but excessive activation eventually destabilizes nervous system regulation. Decision-making weakens. Risk-taking increases, sleep disruption worsens, and emotional control declines. Let me explain this with a simple analogy. Imagine a car with the accelerator pushed down continuously while the braking system becomes weaker. At first, the speed may feel exciting, but eventually, the system becomes dangerous and difficult to control. That's what excessive dopamine activation can do during mania. Now, here's something extremely important. Reduced sleep is not just a symptom of mania. It can also become a trigger. As sleep declines, dopamine regulation becomes even more unstable. This creates a dangerous feedback loop. Less sleep increases stimulation. More stimulation reduces sleep further. What the research shows is that even modest sleep deprivation can significantly impair emotional regulation and increase impulsivity. This is one reason protecting sleep becomes such a critical part of bipolar treatment. Now, another important factor is overstimulation from the modern environment. Constant novelty, Social media, substance use, stress, irregular schedules. All of these can increase nervous system activation. For many individuals with bipolar disorder, the brain appears especially sensitive to excessive stimulation. This is why stability matters so much. Stable sleep, stable routines, stable light exposure, stable recovery. The nervous system tends to regulate better under predictable conditions. Now let's discuss substance use briefly because this is incredibly important. Stimulants, recreational drugs, excessive alcohol, and even chronic high caffeine intake may worsen dopamine instability in vulnerable individuals. And while certain substances may temporarily feel calming or energizing, they often worsen long-term regulation underneath. Now, another major misconception is that mania always feels good. In reality, mania can become deeply destructive physically, emotionally, financially, and socially. Many people experience severe impulsivity, relationship instability, sleep deprivation, emotional overwhelm, and cognitive disorganization during manic episodes. This is why early awareness matters enormously. Recognizing signs like reduced sleep need, racing thoughts, elevated nighttime energy, sudden impulsivity, or excessive stimulation seeking can help individuals seek support earlier before symptoms escalate further. Now, here's one of the most hopeful aspects of neuroscience. The brain is adaptable, and while bipolar disorder often requires medical treatment, nervous system stability can improve dramatically when biology is consistently supported. Protecting sleep, reducing overstimulation, managing stress, maintaining routine, and supporting overall brain health all help create conditions where emotional regulation becomes more stable over time. Now let's talk about one of the most important and often overlooked aspects of bipolar disorder, sleep and circadian rhythm. Because for many people with bipolar disorder, sleep is not just a symptom. It is one of the strongest biological triggers of mood instability itself. Here's what's really going on inside the brain. The nervous system runs on internal timing systems called circadian rhythms. These rhythms regulate sleep, hormones, body temperature, energy, dopamine, cortisol, and emotional regulation. When circadian timing becomes disrupted, emotional stability often becomes disrupted too. This is why even small changes in sleep patterns can strongly affect mood in vulnerable individuals. Let me explain this with a simple analogy. Imagine the brain like an orchestra. Circadian rhythm acts like the conductor, keeping every system synchronized. But when timing becomes chaotic, irregular sleep, late-night stimulation, rotating schedules, poor light exposure, the entire system starts losing coordination. And emotionally, that can appear as mood swings, agitation, depression, impulsivity, or manic symptoms. What the research shows is that sleep deprivation can significantly increase the risk of manic episodes in susceptible individuals. And importantly, many people notice warning signs before major mood shifts occur. Sleeping less but not feeling tired, racing thoughts, elevated nighttime energy, increased goal-seeking behavior, more impulsive decisions. These are often nervous system signals that circadian regulation is becoming unstable. Now here's the important part. Protecting sleep consistency may be one of the most powerful non-medication tools for mood stability. That means consistent sleep and wake times, reducing bright light exposure late at night, getting morning sunlight exposure, limiting overstimulation before bed, and avoiding repeated all-nighters whenever possible. Morning sunlight is especially powerful because it helps regulate cortisol timing, dopamine rhythms, and melatonin production naturally. Even 10 to 20 minutes outdoors shortly after waking can improve circadian alignment significantly. Now, another major factor is nighttime light exposure. Bright screens and artificial light suppress melatonin production and delay sleep timing. And delayed circadian timing often worsens emotional instability. This is why many clinicians recommend reducing bright light exposure 1 to 2 hours before bed. Now let's discuss shift work and travel briefly. Shift work dramatically disrupts circadian biology. And for individuals vulnerable to bipolar disorder, chronic circadian disruption may increase mood instability significantly. The same applies to frequent jet lag and irregular schedules. The brain thrives on predictability, and emotionally sensitive nervous systems often respond especially poorly to circadian chaos. Now, another critical factor is stimulants. Excess caffeine, chronic stress, and sleep deprivation can all increase nervous system activation. And in some individuals, excessive stimulation may worsen manic tendencies. This does not mean caffeine is inherently dangerous for everyone. But awareness matters, especially if someone notices increased anxiety, reduced sleep, racing thoughts, or escalating energy states. Now, here's one of the most powerful insights in this discussion. Mood stability is deeply biological. The brain does not function separately from sleep, hormones, metabolism, stress, and circadian timing. They are all connected. And once people begin supporting the nervous system consistently instead of fighting against biology, stability often becomes far more achievable Now let's talk about stress, cortisol, and nervous system activation. Because one of the biggest hidden drivers of bipolar instability is chronic physiological stress. Most people think stress is only psychological, but stress is also biological. Here's what's really going on inside your body. Whenever the brain perceives threat, uncertainty, overstimulation, or emotional pressure, the nervous system activates the stress response. Adrenaline rises, cortisol rises, heart rate increases, alertness increases, and the brain shifts into a more reactive state. In healthy amounts, this response is adaptive. It helps you survive challenges, but chronic activation becomes damaging over time. And for individuals with bipolar disorder, the nervous system often appears more sensitive to stress-related dysregulation. This is why periods of sleep deprivation, relationship conflict, financial pressure, overwork, substance use, or emotional overwhelm can sometimes trigger episodes. Let me explain this with a simple analogy. Imagine revving a car engine constantly without allowing proper cooling or recovery. Eventually, the system overheats. That's what chronic stress can do to the nervous system. The brain loses flexibility between activation and recovery, and emotional regulation becomes less stable. Now, one of the most important relationships here is between cortisol and sleep. Cortisol naturally follows a rhythm. It should rise in the morning to promote wakefulness and gradually decline at night. But chronic stress often disrupts this timing. As a result, morning fatigue increases, nighttime alertness rises, sleep quality worsens, and nervous system recovery declines. This creates another dangerous cycle. Poor sleep worsens stress regulation, and poor stress regulation worsens sleep further. What the research shows is that chronic elevated cortisol may impair emotional regulation, attention, metabolic health, and even hippocampal function over time. This is why nervous system recovery is not optional. Recovery is biological maintenance for the brain. Now, another important factor is emotional overstimulation. Many individuals with bipolar disorder are highly emotionally sensitive. That sensitivity can sometimes become a strength. Creativity, empathy, drive, and emotional depth. But without proper regulation, excessive emotional stimulation may overwhelm the nervous system. This is why emotional boundaries and recovery practices matter enormously. Now let's discuss practical regulation tools. One of the most effective ways to calm the nervous system is controlled breathing. Slow breathing patterns help activate the parasympathetic nervous system, the recovery side of the autonomic nervous system. Even a few minutes of slow nasal breathing can reduce physiological arousal significantly. Exercise also plays a major role. Regular movement improves stress resilience, sleep quality, dopamine regulation, blood flow, and emotional stability. But balance matters. Extreme overtraining combined with poor recovery can sometimes increase nervous system stress instead. Now, another major issue is overstimulation from technology. Constant notifications, endless scrolling, and rapid information exposure keep the brain in a low-grade hypervigilant state. The nervous system never fully settles. This is one reason quiet recovery periods are becoming increasingly important. Walking outdoors, reducing screen exposure, meditation, journaling, and time away from constant stimulation, these help the brain shift out of chronic activation. Now, here's one of the most important ideas in this discussion. Stress management is not just psychological self-care. It is nervous system regulation. And biologically, a more regulated nervous system often creates better emotional stability, clearer thinking, improved sleep, and stronger long-term resilience. Now let's talk about metabolism, inflammation, and brain energy. Because one of the most fascinating discoveries in modern neuroscience is that mental health and metabolic health are deeply connected. The brain is one of the most energy-demanding organs in the human body. Even though it represents only a small percentage of total body weight, it consumes enormous amounts of glucose, oxygen, and cellular energy every single day. And when brain energy regulation becomes impaired, emotional regulation can suffer too. Here's what's really going on inside the body. Researchers increasingly believe that bipolar disorder may involve disruptions in mitochondrial function, the energy-producing systems inside cells. Mitochondria help generate ATP, which powers brain activity, nerve signaling, emotional regulation, and cognitive performance. When energy regulation becomes unstable, the brain may struggle to maintain consistent emotional balance. Let me explain this with a simple analogy. Imagine a city with unstable power supply. Sometimes the lights become excessively bright. Other times, entire sections lose power. That's similar to what unstable brain energy regulation can look like neurologically. Periods of excessive activation may contribute to mania. Periods of low energy may contribute to depressive symptoms. Now, another important factor is inflammation. Chronic inflammation affects neurotransmitters, stress hormones, sleep quality, and brain signaling pathways. What the research shows is that elevated inflammatory markers are often associated with worsening mood symptoms and cognitive dysfunction. And importantly, chronic stress itself increases inflammation. So stress, sleep, metabolism, and emotional health are all interacting continuously. Now let's discuss insulin resistance because this area is becoming increasingly important in psychiatry. Insulin does far more than regulate blood sugar. It also affects brain function, dopamine signaling, inflammation, and energy metabolism. When insulin sensitivity worsens, energy regulation declines, inflammation rises, blood sugar becomes unstable, and cognitive performance often suffers. This is one reason highly processed diets may negatively affect mood and mental health over time. Large glucose spikes followed by crashes can worsen fatigue, irritability, brain fog, stress hormone activation, and emotional instability. Now, this does not mean nutrition alone causes bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder is complex and multifactorial, but metabolic health may strongly influence symptom severity, resilience, recovery, and long-term brain function. Now, let's talk about nutrition practically. Many clinicians recommend focusing on protein-rich whole foods, healthy fats, fiber, omega-3 fatty acids, mineral-rich foods, and stable meal timing. Why? Because stable physiology often supports more stable nervous system function. Omega-3 fatty acids are especially interesting because they influence inflammation, neuronal membrane health, and dopamine signaling. Some research suggests omega-3 supplementation may support mood regulation in certain individuals alongside proper medical treatment. Now, another emerging area involves ketogenic and low-carbohydrate metabolic therapies. Some early research suggests ketogenic approaches may improve brain energy metabolism and neural stability in certain psychiatric conditions. This area is still developing scientifically, and it is not a replacement for professional treatment. But it highlights something important. The brain and metabolism are deeply connected biologically. Now let's discuss alcohol briefly. Alcohol strongly disrupts sleep quality, dopamine regulation, inflammation, and emotional stability. While alcohol may temporarily feel calming, it often worsens nervous system dysregulation underneath. This is why reducing alcohol intake often improves mood stability significantly. Now here's one of the most powerful ideas in this discussion. Mental health is not separate from physical health. The brain is part of the body, and supporting sleep, metabolism, inflammation control, hydration, movement, and nutrition often creates better conditions for emotional regulation and long-term resilience. Because ultimately, the nervous system performs best when the body supporting it is functioning well too. Now let's talk about treatment. Because one of the biggest misconceptions about bipolar disorder is that treatment is only about suppressing symptoms. But effective treatment is really about stabilizing brain physiology. The goal is not eliminating emotion. The goal is creating nervous system stability so the brain can regulate mood, energy, sleep, motivation, and cognition more effectively over time. Here's what's really going on inside the body. Bipolar disorder involves changes in multiple biological systems simultaneously: dopamine signaling, circadian rhythm, stress hormones, glutamate activity, inflammation, mitochondrial energy production, and emotional regulation networks inside the brain. That's why treatment often requires a multi-layered approach. Now, first, we need to discuss medication honestly and clearly. For many individuals with bipolar disorder, medication can be life-changing and sometimes life-saving. Mood stabilizers help reduce the intensity and frequency of manic and depressive episodes by helping regulate neural activity more consistently. And importantly, untreated mania itself can be damaging over time. Repeated severe episodes may increase impulsivity, relationship instability, financial problems, sleep disruption, and cognitive impairment. This is why early treatment matters. Now, different medications work through different mechanisms. Some regulate dopamine pathways. Some stabilize excitatory signaling. Others improve sleep and circadian regulation. But here's an important principle. Medication works best when combined with behavioral and physiological support systems. Let me explain this with a simple analogy. Imagine trying to stabilize a table with only one strong leg while the others remain unstable. Eventually, the entire system still struggles. That's what happens when someone relies only on medication while ignoring sleep, stress, circadian rhythm, substance use, and nervous system recovery. Now let's talk about psychotherapy. One of the most effective evidence-based approaches for bipolar disorder is cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. CBT helps individuals recognize stress triggers, behavioral patterns, thought distortions, and early warning signs before episodes escalate. Another highly effective approach is interpersonal and social rhythm therapy. This therapy focuses heavily on stabilizing daily routines, sleep timing, meal timing, activity timing, and social patterns, because consistent rhythms often create more stable nervous system regulation biologically. Now, another major issue is substance use. Alcohol, stimulants, cannabis, and recreational drugs can destabilize mood significantly in vulnerable individuals, especially when combined with poor sleep and chronic stress. This is why many people unintentionally worsen emotional instability while attempting to self-medicate symptoms. Now let's discuss exercise. Regular movement improves dopamine regulation, sleep quality, stress resilience, inflammation, blood flow, and mitochondrial health, all of which support emotional regulation directly. Moderate consistent exercise is often one of the most powerful natural nervous system stabilizers available. Now, nutrition matters too. Highly processed diets, unstable blood sugar, and chronic inflammation may worsen brain health and emotional regulation over time. Stable meal timing, whole foods, protein intake, omega-3 fatty acids, hydration, and metabolic health all support brain function more effectively. Now, here's one of the most important ideas in this discussion. Bipolar disorder is not a character flaw. It is not weakness. And it is not simply moodiness. It is a complex nervous system condition involving biology, stress, sleep, metabolism, genetics, and emotional regulation simultaneously. And once treatment focuses on stabilizing the entire system, not just suppressing symptoms, long-term outcomes often improve dramatically. So when we step back and look at the bigger picture, one thing becomes very clear. Bipolar disorder is not simply about mood. It is about brain regulation. It is about how the nervous system manages energy, sleep, emotional processing, dopamine signaling, stress physiology, and circadian timing over time. And once you understand that, you stop viewing bipolar disorder through simplistic labels and begin understanding it through biology. Today, we explored how bipolar disorder involves real physiological changes inside the brain and nervous system. We discussed how dopamine dysregulation, circadian disruption, stress hormones, inflammation, sleep deprivation, and metabolic health all influence emotional stability. We examined why mania is not simply high energy, but often a state of excessive nervous system activation that can impair judgment, sleep, impulse control, and long-term brain health. We talked about how depressive episodes involve changes in motivation, cognition, energy production, and emotional regulation. And importantly, we explored why treatment must focus on stabilizing the nervous system as a whole, not just suppressing symptoms temporarily. Because the brain functions as an interconnected system. Sleep affects mood. Stress affects dopamine. Circadian rhythm affects hormones. Metabolism affects cognition. Inflammation affects emotional regulation. Everything is connected. We also discussed practical tools that support stability: consistent sleep and wake times, morning sunlight exposure, stress reduction, exercise, stable daily structure, limiting substances that destabilize mood, supporting metabolic health, and seeking professional treatment early when symptoms appear. Because one of the most important lessons in neuroscience is this: the brain changes according to repeated patterns. Repeated stress changes the brain. Repeated sleep disruption changes the brain. Repeated instability changes the brain. But recovery patterns can change the brain too. Consistency, treatment, awareness, behavioral structure, and physiological support all create conditions where healing and stability become more possible over time. Now, here's one final point that's incredibly important. People with bipolar disorder are not broken. Many highly intelligent, creative, driven, and successful individuals live with bipolar disorder. But unmanaged nervous system instability can become destructive if ignored. And this is why understanding the condition matters so much. Awareness creates earlier intervention. Earlier intervention improves outcomes, and better physiology often supports better emotional regulation long term. Now, here's my challenge for you. Pay attention to the relationship between your nervous system and your daily habits. Your sleep, your stress, your stimulation, your routines, your recovery. Because mental health is deeply biological, and small repeated behaviors often shape emotional stability more than people realize. If this video added value, like the video and subscribe to join others optimizing their brain, metabolism, emotional health, recovery, and long-term health naturally through science-backed tools and practical neuroscience. And as always, thank you for watching.